gaining strength. A tropical storm is becoming more dangerous as it heads towards the Carolinas. We have the latest. Annual gathering. How the Knights of Columbus is altering its convention due to the coronavirus pandemic. Sparking concerns. A report from Germany addresses the health of Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI. And helping out. Pope Francis says the Eucharist can inspire the faithful to support those around us. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, August 3rd, 2020. Good evening, and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. President Donald Trump meets with U.S. tech workers and signs an executive order on hiring American. He is also trying to reach a deal with Congress on another stimulus package, but do not expect a speedy agreement. And we are keeping an eye on Joe Biden's campaign. He is expected to pick a vice presidential candidate soon. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, the White House supports strongly those $1,200 stimulus payments, and here in the middle of a pandemic is demanding that U.S. jobs stay here.
President Donald Trump meets with high-tech workers.
Today I'm signing an executive order to ensure that the federal government lives by a very simple rule: hire American. We've been doing it at a level that hasn't been done maybe ever.
The push to hire American comes at a critical time.
As we speak, we're finalizing H-1B regulations so that no American worker is replaced ever again.
Meanwhile, in Congress, no agreement yet on more coronavirus aid.
A building is on fire, and they're deciding how much water they want to have in the bucket. This is very important to stop. Millions of people could have fallen into poverty without the $600.
As the world awaits a vaccine, this update from the White House Coronavirus Task Force.
But I want to be very clear. What we're seeing today is different from March and April. It is extraordinarily widespread. It's into the rural as equal urban areas.
In a tweet earlier today, the president took a swipe at Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Dr. Deborah Birx. So, crazy Nancy Pelosi said horrible things about Dr. Deborah Birx, going after her because she was too positive on the very good job we are doing on combating the China virus, including vaccines and therapeutics. In order to counter Nancy, Deborah took the bait and hit us. Pathetic. Meanwhile, former Vice President Joe Biden is expected to announce his running mate soon. Potential picks include California Senator Kamala Harris, former National Security Advisor Susan Rice, and California Congresswoman Karen Bass. The Democratic National Convention will begin in Milwaukee in 2 weeks.
Back to that executive order, the president criticized the Tennessee Valley Authority, the TVA, for hiring foreign workers. Well, we're told tonight after that meeting, the TVA has apparently changed its mind. Tracy.
Okay, thank you, Owen. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reporting for us tonight. Thank you again, Owen. A tropical storm Isaias may return to hurricane strength tonight before making landfall in the Carolinas. Coastal residents are being warned to brace for flooding rains and storm surge. Correspondent Mark Irons reports. Mark?
Tracy, hurricane warnings have been issued in both North and South Carolina. Isaias did damage this weekend in Puerto Rico and the Bahamas. And now aid groups like Catholic Charities are preparing for this storm while also trying to manage the coronavirus.
Officials across the southern Atlantic U.S. coast are keeping a close eye on Isaias while dealing with the coronavirus. Florida dealt with questions about possible evacuations.
I think you probably won't see a huge number of those up and down the East Coast. And we, in the era of COVID, I think our guidance from the state has been, look, if it's a close call, err on the side of people just hunkering down rather than sending people on the road.
Isaias killed 2 people in the Caribbean and inflicted damage to the Bahamas over the weekend. The storm brought heavy rain and flooding to Florida even after weakening to a tropical storm. Its most damaging winds remained offshore. As Florida battles the coronavirus, Governor Ron DeSantis reminds Floridians to be prepared during hurricane season.
You should have 7 days of food, water, and medicine. You very well may experience power outages, so just be prepared for that.
The Diocese of Raleigh, North Carolina was impacted by Hurricane Matthew in 2016, Hurricane Florence in 2018, and now juggles a coronavirus response coupled with the potential threat looming from Isaias.
We've actually been preparing for something like this all summer.
Daniel Altano is the Director of Disaster Services for Catholic Charities in the Diocese of Raleigh. Distribution points are typically set up after storms. Altano says social distancing will now be factored in if his team has to give out needed goods.
Cleaning supplies, non-perishable food and water, and hygiene items to the communities that need them. And so we're looking to limit crowds, limit interaction, and get those materials and those supplies to families in a safe way.
In Charleston, South Carolina, preparations for potential flooding sandbags have been handed out, and a tropical storm warning has been extended northward up the U.S. East Coast all the way to New Hampshire. Tracy?
Correspondent Mark Irons reporting for us tonight. Thanks so much, Mark. A memorial was held on the one-year anniversary of the shooting at the Walmart in El Paso, Texas. The names of the 23 people killed were read out loud.
Leonardo Campos Jr. and Maribel Hernandez Loya.
The interfaith service marked 12 months since a gunman opened fire at the crowded Walmart on August 3, 2019. Investigators say Latinos were targeted. Many survivors and family members of the victims wore masks at yesterday's memorial. The Boston Marathon bomber gets his death sentence overturned by a panel of federal appeals judges. It has been 6 months since a panel of 3 judges heard the appeal of Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. The judges say the jury was not properly screened for bias, and they're agreeing with the defense lawyers that Tsarnaev deserves a new trial to see if he should get the death penalty. A jailbreak by ISIS at a prison in Afghanistan turned into an all-night gun battle with police and ended with 29 people killed. It began as a suicide car bombing yesterday at a prison in Jalalabad. It houses 1,500 prisoners, and the city was shut down while police search for them. Most are now caught, and ISIS is claiming responsibility for that attack. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu lashes out at growing protests against him, saying they are being pushed by a biased media that distorts the facts.
קודם כל, אף אחד לא מגביל את ההפגנות. להפך, הולכים לקראתם. זה מדגרות של קורונה.
In a 6-minute tirade at his cabinet meeting, Netanyahu condemned the violence. He also slammed the media for inflaming the protests, devoting disproportionate airtime and exaggerating police force against protesters. Netanyahu claims the demonstrators are inciting violence against him. Pope Francis is asking for prayers for a cathedral in Nicaragua that was attacked with a firebomb. An unidentified man threw a Molotov cocktail into a chapel of the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception on Friday. It is in the capital of Managua. The firebomb severely damaged a crucifix that's more than 3 centuries old. The Archdiocese of Managua says the attack was an act of desecration. Well, China is offering money to anyone who snitches on secret church services inside their homes. The Chinese Communist Party wants to know about underground churches and is offering up to $14,000 to anyone who reports on religious activity that's not sanctioned by the government. Our report from Germany is sparking concerns over the health of Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI. According to a German newspaper, the 93-year-old has not been feeling well since he returned from his visit to the country in late June. Pope Benedict XVI went to his homeland to visit his ailing brother, who died shortly after. Since 2013, the Pope Emeritus has been living in the Vatican Gardens Monastery. With more details is Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register. Ed, welcome back to the show. So good to see you again. So what do we know about Pope Benedict's illness?
Well, we know that he has a facial rash, Tracy, which is the medical term is erysipelas, and it's a sort of herpes or shingles on the face, and it can be very painful, but it's not life-threatening, and it can be treated with antibiotics. And it seems to have been exacerbated when he went to see his brother, Monsignor Georg Ratzinger, who's since died in Regensburg last month. and that's what made it worse. But as I say, it's not life-threatening. Although Peter Sewald, who saw him, and this is where the news came from, his biographer saw him at the weekend, and he said that he is extremely frail, and in fact that he's losing his voice, although he hasn't lost his mind.
Ed, what's the reaction in Rome to this report? Are people at all concerned?
Well, not really, because in the same report from Peter Sewald, he said that actually Benedict is quite optimistic about his health, and he says that he hopes to be writing again. And as I say, it's not life-threatening. It's not as though he's had some viral infection or some serious flu or COVID or anything like that. It's more it's related to his skin, and it's a bacterial infection, so it's not as serious as perhaps some thought it was initially.
Well, I want to turn to some other Vatican news. We know that Pope Francis appointed a new personal secretary over the weekend. Who is that secretary?
Yes, he's an Italian priest. He's an official in the Secretariat of State. He's in the section for relations with states. His name is Father Fabio Salerno. He's what's called the second secretary to Pope Francis. He has a first secretary who's a Uruguayan priest, Father Gonzalo Emilius. The Pope likes to change these appointments fairly regularly, and that's what he's done in this case.
Yeah, is it unusual, Ed, for a pope to change his personal secretary as often as Pope Francis has done?
Well, it is, Tracy. I mean, in the past, John Paul II and Benedict XVI both had long-serving secretaries, Cardinal Stanislav Dziwisz under John Paul II and Archbishop Georg Genswein under Benedict XVI. So it is unusual, but Pope Francis really wants to have a regular turnover of secretaries so that they don't become too powerful and too much of a sort of personality and a role in itself, an important role in itself. They're very much the servants of the Pope, and I think he wants to keep it that way, and that's why he's having this sort of high turnover of staff.
Well, Ed, thank you so much for coming on. We always appreciate your analysis. Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register. Thanks, Ed.
Thank you, Tracy.
Coming up, a Catholic diocese in Kentucky releases a report on clergy sexual abuse. Well, church leaders are defending a Catholic saint after a prominent Democratic lawmaker claimed a statue honoring the saint is part of a white supremacist culture. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from New York says a statue of St. Damien of Molokai in the U.S. Capitol honors colonialism. But one Catholic scholar says St. Damien is a hero to the Hawaiian people, that he gave his life serving an isolated leper colony. Joining us now with analysis is Dr. Matthew Bunson, executive editor and Washington bureau chief of EWTN News. He is also the author of the book St. Damien of Molokai, Apostle of the Exiled. Matthew, so great to see you.
It's good to be with you again, Tracy.
So, Matthew, what exactly did Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez say about St. Damien of Molokai? And when you heard her comments, what was your reaction?
Well, she was giving a tour on Instagram, showing people around the U.S. Capitol, in particular the Statuary Hall, and she focused on St. Damien, who's one of two statues from Hawaii. I want to come back to that in a second. And mentioned, as you did in the introduction, that while you can litigate certain statues, she said, he's emblematic of the sort of white supremacist culture, the patriarchy, as she put it, and how all of the stories, including obviously the statues, seem to reflect that type of a culture. She may or may not be aware that the second statue from Hawaii, all states have two statues, was King Kamehameha I, who was the first great king of Hawaii, who united the islands and is honored as what's called the Napoleon of the Pacific. So those are the two statues in the U.S. Capitol. Well, I wasn't especially surprised at her comments, in part because the progressive movement, and certainly Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is one of the most prominent members of it. They have been calling for some time for the removal of statues that they deem to be problematic, and apparently Damien of Molokai would have to be one of them, unfortunately.
I know that you wrote a book about St. Damien. What would you like our audience to know about him?
Well, to understand Damien is also to understand Hawaii during his era. When he arrived, he was ordained a priest as a missionary from Belgium. And in 1873, in the company of Bishop Louis Désiré Maigret, who was the sort of vicar apostolic or the bishop of the islands before there was a formal diocese, they sailed to Molokai, and in particular, the terrible leper colony of Kalapapa. And the plan was originally to rotate priests who would be able to bring help to the lepers. Damien volunteered to be one of them, and he ended up staying. And as he pledged, he wanted to give his life to the lepers, to die for them, and ultimately he became one of them. What's important to understand about his 16 years of ministry as the caretaker of the lepers on Molokai was that with his own hands, he built chapels, he carved coffins, he helped schools, he dressed the wounds and the injuries of the lepers. He buried them. He was there every day. And that is a legacy of help, of love, of service, and ultimately of the sacrifice of his own life for the lepers that I think rests at the very heart of why the Hawaiian people have honored him for so long and really consider him one of the greatest heroes in the history of the islands.
Well, you grew up in Hawaii. Can you tell us, how do people there view St. Damien?
Well, as I was just mentioning, when the time came for two statues to be chosen from Hawaii, two were picked. One was King Kamehameha that I mentioned. The other was Damien of Molokai. They chose him precisely because he was ranked and remains ranked as one of the greatest heroes, as I was saying, in the history of Hawaii. They wanted to have a testament to his service. And even today, he is still considered one of the great heroes. So if the question is asked, does he deserve to be in the U.S. Capitol, I think it's an ardent yes from the people of Hawaii who chose him. When the statues were installed in 1969, there was a huge celebration. And every year in Hawaii, they continue to celebrate on his feast day, St. Damien Day. And Barack Obama himself, I thought, summed it up very well at the time of Damien de Veuster's canonization as a saint in 2009. He said that he gave a voice to the voiceless. And Damien stands as a role model for the protection and sanctity and the dignity of the human person. And that itself, I think, is something that Hawaii understands very profoundly. And that is precisely why he remains, and I hope will remain, not just in the U.S. Capitol, but standing in front of the Hawaii State Capitol, where he remains an icon for service, for love, and for Christian charity.
Matthew, thank you so much for coming on and for your analysis. We really appreciate it. Dr. Matthew Bunson, Executive Editor and Washington Bureau Chief of EWTN News. Thank you again, Matthew.
Good to be with you. God bless.
A diocese in northern Kentucky has released a report on sexual abuse that shows dozens of priests abused children since the 1950s. The Diocese of Covington says the report was compiled by two former FBI agents. According to the report, 59 priests and 31 others were guilty of the abuse. In 2006, the diocese paid $81 million to settle abuse claims. Up next, the head of the Knights of Columbus tells us how the organization is helping others during the coronavirus pandemic. Plus, Pope Francis says the Eucharist can help us care for those in need. The Knights of Columbus is holding its annual convention this week. It begins tomorrow and will be broadcast on EWTN. It will also be a little different from the 137 previous meetings. Carl Anderson, Supreme Knight of the Knights of Columbus, joins me now on Skype. Welcome back. So good to see you.
Well, thank you very much. Great to be with you tonight.
So this year's convention is happening at a very difficult time, as we know, and it'll largely be virtual. How is the convention going to be different for our viewers as they watch it here on EWTN, and what can they expect?
Well, I think they'll be able to expect some things that are the same. That is, I'll be giving my annual report. They'll be able to see the Mass, which this year will be exciting because it will be from St. Mary's Church in New Haven, Connecticut, which is where the Knights of Columbus was founded, and we've just completed a beautiful renovation of this church. So those things will be the same. Unfortunately, as people know who've been to a Knights of Columbus international convention. It's one of the great fraternal celebrations in the Catholic world. We have 1,000 delegates and alternates. They bring their wives. Many of them bring their families. We have 100 bishops and cardinals, hundreds of priests, and many other Knights of Columbus who come to be with their friends. So that part we won't be doing this year, but getting the necessary business done, taking a close look at our performance during the past year and planning for priorities of the coming year, and then electing some of our board members, all that necessary work will get done, and you'll be able to see some of that.
Oh, that's wonderful. We're all looking forward to it. As you know, we are in a very unique time right now with the global pandemic. There's also high unemployment and a lot of uncertainty. How have the Knights been responding during this time? Well,
one of the most interesting and I find inspirational parts of being a member of the Knights of Columbus is that when trouble hits, Knights step forward and try to help. So we've been doing that in all the countries in which we're active, but especially in the United States. We've launched a program called Leave No Neighbor Behind. We're trying to get food from food pantries and food deliveries, especially to families who are shut in or elderly who are shut in and can't get to the stores so easily. We've raised about $5 million and donated that for food assistance and some medical assistance. We've worked with our Catholic nursing homes to help them because they've been so hard hit in this. Also, we've done blood donations and collections because that's been also with people restricted in travel. Blood supplies are down, so we've given this extra effort as well. So in a lot of different ways, on the volunteer level, we've been working very hard. Now, we also realize that some of our parishes and our dioceses have been hard hit. So several months ago, we announced a $100 million loan program for dioceses to get them through on emergency loans if they have shortfalls that they need to compensate for right away. So we've been doing that as well.
Well, finally, as you know, Father Michael McGivney will be beatified at the end of October. Can you talk about why this is so important to the Knights and the Church?
Well, it's tremendously important to us, of course, because here we have our founder being beatified, and we're just so very, very grateful to Pope Francis for recognizing the miracle attributed to Father McGivney's intercession, and also for setting the date for the beatification, which will be October 31st of this year. The miracle is fantastic. An unborn child in the womb with a life-threatening condition that meant he was not going to survive, cured miraculously. So that's tremendous for us. But, you know, Father McGivney has been an inspiration to hundreds of thousands of Catholics, many, many priests for generations. And now to see him recognized by the Universal Church, his holiness, his approach to charity, his path to brotherhood and unity, comes at a tremendous time for us. Obviously, what's going on in our nation with the division, hostility. Now's the time we need more charity, we need more unity, we need more brotherhood. And, you know, the fourth principle of the Knights of Columbus is patriotism. And so these days, I would say, you want to be patriotic? Then foster more charity, foster unity, foster brotherhood in our communities. And that's the best way tomorrow we can step out and be patriotic. So I think raising up Father McGivney's example for the Universal Church, which is what beatification will do, really is going to be something special. And I think also very special for our young Catholic priests. What better way to give them encouragement, a shot in the arm spiritually, you might say, is to take one of their own, a young, dedicated, holy parish priest who devoted his life to his parishioners and to the laity and formed this great organization, the Knights of Columbus. So we think there's going to be many, many benefits in many different areas for the Church universally, but also Church and where we're very active, United States, Canada, Mexico, Philippines, and now Korea, Poland, Lithuania, Ukraine, and France.
Well, thank you so much, Carl. We really appreciate it. Carl Anderson, Supreme Knight of the Knights of Columbus. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
And you can watch several events from the 138th Supreme Convention of the Knights of Columbus right here on EWTN. The opening mass is tomorrow night at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. Carl Anderson's annual report is at 8 p.m. and on Wednesday we have the Memorial Mass at 2 p.m. For more listings, check EWTN.com. And we thank the Knights for its support of EWTN News Nightly. Finally tonight, Pope Francis says receiving the Eucharist can help us care for one another.
La logica di farsi carico dell'altro.
At a Sunday talk with pilgrims at the Vatican, the Holy Father says our Lord wants us to be active in the lives of those around us. Pope Francis added, when we trust in God, we become courageous and want to share with others. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.